How's it going, guys? It's Poetry Said. Welcome to another EU4 guide. I'm not starting in the loading screen this time, and I just wanted to get right into it. So, today we're going to be talking about trade in EU4. This is a big part of the game, probably the second or third biggest component of the game behind the military part and the diplomatic part, possibly. So, we're going to be going pretty in depth on how trade works in the game, what the best way to earn money is, the best strategies for doing so, all that sort of stuff. So to start off, I'm going to start off with the very basics. Well, first let me just say that I'm going to be playing as Venice. Venice is like the classic trade republic. I'll talk about this a little more at the end of the video, but there's several nations that are really good to play as for trade. Venice is one of them, Genoa is one of them, and I'll talk about the other ones later on, like I said. But let's go ahead and get into it. So one thing I really like about EU4 is that it is a very unique trade system. It's really, really complex when you look at it, and I will show you guys it right now. It's very complex looking, but once you get used to it, it's actually not that bad, and it's actually very interesting. It's not necessarily the best trade system out of any game, but it's pretty good. I like it. So as you can see, we're going to just kind of focus on a couple of these little nodes, as they're called. If you're a complete noob to the game, these are called nodes. And we're going to begin by talking about the node system. So you can probably see, I mean you can definitely see if you're watching the video, there's these nodes, these little areas that are colored in. They don't have any coinciding really with any other map mode. They're just kind of trade regions. They are just based off of historical trade regions and stuff. And basically, everything in this node, all these provinces, are part of this trade node. And what this means is that the base production, which you can see from this screen, this is new as of the last update, the common sense one, but the production is what actually contributes to the amount of trade value in a node. I'm not going to get too in-depth with that, because that's stuff that doesn't really matter, because you can't really change it that much. But what we're going to talk about first is just the basics of the trade node system. So, first off, let's talk about just the way that trade flows. So when you zoom in, you can see these arrows, and these arrows point from one node down to the next one. And what this means is that trade flows in this direction. So let's start over here in Alexandria. So we're starting off here in Alexandria. I'll talk about these numbers a little more, but for now, let's just look at the trade flow. So it flows in three directions. They're all going west. So one of them goes to Constantinople. One of them goes all the way up here to Ragusa. It's a little hard to see, but it goes to Ragusa. And the other one goes over here to the Tunis node. So, from the Constantinople node, let's just go with this line. So from the Constantinople line, this line of trade, then it goes from here to Ragusa, and then from Ragusa straight into Venice. So you might have noticed already, if you played the game at least a little bit and know a little bit about trade and just want to learn more, you probably know that Venice has no arrows leading out. It actually has only 3 arrows coming in, and that's why it's called a end node. All of the trade that goes to Venice ends there. And what that means is that it's a very, very prosperous nodes. The end nodes, which there are 3, and I'll talk about that in a sec, the end nodes are definitely the best nodes in the game. The other end nodes are Genoa along here and the English Channel. And you can kind of see how it makes sense. The English Channel is the only one where it's kind of weird because it comes in from the colonies and from the Americas, but also comes in from Lubeck, the Lubeck node, and from the Baltic Sea and the North Sea and whatnot. But definitely with Venice and Genoa, you know, they were very, very... I really like the fact that those two are the 2 end nodes down here. It used to be actually where Bordeaux was one and Sevilla was one, but Genoa wasn't. And I'm so glad that they made Genoa one and took those 2 out, because it's more historical how Genoa was like a huge center of trade where trade just flowed in. So real quick, while I'm in the screen, I have a couple more things to cover, but those are the 3 end nodes. Let me just wrap up this little segment up by saying Venice, Genoa, English Channel. Those are the 3 end nodes. Those are the nodes you want to control. And they're pretty good. There's other secondary nodes, actually, like Lubeck is a very, very good node to control because it just kind of funnels in trade power, and if you're Denmark or La Hansa, you can really easily keep power there. Another good one is the Ivory Coast, which is down here. I actually can't see that because I am playing in a too early of a game, which I probably should have thought about. The Ivory Coast is really good for a colonial nation if you're playing as a colonial nation because it controls the triangle of trade in that corner of the triangle. And the Gulf of Aden and Alexandria, both of these are very good nodes because they control all the trade coming in from India and the Silk Road and stuff. Constantinople as well is a very good node to have. So anyways, let's go and talk about the trade node buttons. Let's talk about what these numbers mean, because this is very important just for quick estimations on trade value and stuff. So when you hover over it, it already tells you some of the information that you need to know. So the 9.8, you can see, is the trade value in the node. Basically, that just means how much money there is to be had out of all the money that ends up here. That's how much money there is in the Venice node. There's about 10 ducats. We collect 5.46, and the reason we collect this is because of this number. This 89 here is our trade power. Trade power is just a generic number that is just, it's relative. It doesn't even actually mean anything on its own. So what that means is out of the total trade value, we can sort it by trade value. It was already sorted, but we have the most trade power. Ferrara has the 31, and so what it does is it adds up all the trade powers that are in this node from every nation that has any power in the node, and then it takes yours, and that's how much of a cut you get out of this 9.8. And it's very simple with end nodes. Actually, you can see that. So I should have probably talked about this before, but let me talk about ways that you can kind of use this stuff to your advantage. So right now, you start off the game with 2 merchants, 3 if you're a merchant republic, I believe, like Venice and Genoa. But most of the time, you'll just start off with 2. But if you're going for a trade game and you do Venice or Genoa or one of the similar nations, you start off with 3. And what this actually means is that you can actually put merchants in nodes that are upstream, up from the arrow, and you can use this button. I'll show you guys in a sec if it'll let me click, and you can say, so let me do this real quick. Let me just recall the merchant. I'll let it play for a couple seconds. Don't worry about it, because I want to show you guys this. I'm not even going to worry about it. There's going to be a whole bunch of pop-ups, but don't even worry about it. It doesn't even matter. Yep, there it is, because I had literally not even started the game. Alright, so let's look at this. So we have 2 options: transfer trade power and collect from trade. Now, transfer trade power, what that does is it actually pushes more of the money from the nodes upstream, downstream towards your node. So the benefit of this is that, let's say, like we don't own any provinces in the Ragusa node, but by protecting trade and stuff, and we have a vassal in this node actually, by doing this, we actually do have a bit of trade power in the Ragusa node. And what this means is that right now, we're not using this trade power for anything. It's just this money, our power in this node is not being used for anything. So what we can do is we can either transfer trade power, and what that'll do is it'll transfer that 7% of the 2.0 downstream towards Venice. Or we can collect from trade, which means that we'll collect that 7% out of this 2.0. So I'm going to tell you guys my opinion on this. People have different opinions, but most of the time, you want to transfer trade power. The reason why, especially in a case like this, if you're already controlling an end node pretty much, then you want to do that. The reason why is because when you do this, you're pushing value to here where it's not going to be more split up. You have more control over it in your home node naturally. That's almost always the case. There are a few exceptions, but as a pretty good rule of thumb for basics of trade, you never really want to use your merchants to collect unless it's like really the only other option you have for a merchant. In other words, if you're in a crappy node, that's like a beginning node, like Ethiopia's one, for example. So let's see. Yeah, I talked about the trade power. Then this is your percent of the trade. Trade range is something that's a little more minor. These are checkered, and what that means is that we can't reach those right now. And that just kind of goes away with like ideas. If you get trade ideas, or if you get technology, diplomatic technology, that goes away and you get a greater trade range. So there's not really much you can do about that in the early game, but you don't really need to anyway. So you're never really going to have enough merchants to use those successfully early on. So let me see what I'm missing just in case. So I think that's pretty much all for the trade node system, the basics. That just remember to collect only when nothing else is available, really, as a good rule of thumb. Later on, you'll kind of see that you can optimize stuff. I should say, you can go to the trade screen here, and you can actually see how much money you're making from trade, and then you can go and change something around and come back here the next month to see how much it has changed, to see how much you went up in money or not. This is also another important screen because it has trade efficiency, trade range, trade steering, all this other stuff that we're going to talk about in just a second. So let's talk about trade power, the best ways to get trade power and to ultimately control your nodes. This is my second main topic, and we have two more after this. So the first main way to get trade power is to take land. It's pretty simple, but you want to just take more land in the node you want to control because, like I said at the beginning, base production is what contributes to the trade value and the trade power. And so if you get that trade power, you obviously have more control, you get more money, and it's just good to have more land in general in this game. So you might have noticed these little buttons here. This is another very, very important part of getting trade power. These are estuaries and coastal trade centers and inland centers of trade. And I think I might be missing one other type. There's estuary. No, I think that's it. There's those three things that really contribute. There's like staple ports. I don't remember. But these three things contribute a lot to trade power. In this province, this is in Venice, Venezia, in my capital, it gives me more trade power, more tax income, and more naval force limit. Ferrara, which is one of my rivals early on normally for a Venice game, has local trade power plus 10%. So they automatically get 10% just for that province, besides the whatever else it gets for the province itself. So those are really, really important if you want to be able to control a node as far as trade goes. So you want to prioritize prioritize those. Like I said, also higher base production is also a good thing, but especially those centers of trade and estuaries. The second way you can really, really increase your trade power in a node, and this is probably one of the most common ways, is to build more ships. If you have more light ships, which are the barks, these are the second one here, the barks, and then they become, I don't really remember what they become, but you can look at that pretty easily. In here, where is it? Somewhere in here. They become, I'm not sure actually, but somewhere in here you can find that. Those are also used to greatly increase your trade power in a node, and they have a flat value, which you can see also here. They have a value of 2.0, and then later models of the ships actually have more power. Another way you can increase trade power is ideas and traditions and stuff. For instance, I believe Venice has a thing where they get more trade efficiency is different, but I think there's one that gives more. No, they don't. There's different ideas that give more trade power. There it is. Yeah, global trade power abroad. They give you trade ideas, you know, basically your traditions give you more trade power, flat increase. It's really good. And the last way, it's funny, I actually did a guide about this, about mercantilism, which is something that Venice starts off with a good amount, but you don't really actually get much. Basically, it's hard to get mercantilism, basically, but provincial trade power modifier. What this means is that each province gives 50% more trade power at this level. It's twice this number. It's really good to have mercantilism. You can actually get that with this button right here. Where is it? Is it not there for me? There it is, that one. So that one is a pretty good way. It's a steady way, but it kind of save up your papal influence for that, and you can get that. Let me just flip to my second page of notes here. So that's all for trade power. It's pretty simple. Trade income. We're going to talk about the formula for trade income and how trade income is decided. So we already talked about this, and we talked about how much I collect. So basically, we have 45% of 9.8. That would be less than 5, right? Just doing some quick math. So how come we actually get more than 5 or more than 4.9, which would be exactly half? And if we were to do the exact math, it would be like 4.5 or something like that. How come we're getting 5.4? Well, the reason why is because there's a formula, and let me just say the formula real quick. So the formula is trade income equals total trade value in a province. So in Venice, we have 45 or 89 times the trade power share. So basically, it's saying, you know, total trade power times how much we have. That's 45%. That's basically, or it's saying, yeah, basically it's saying we get how much percent, and then it's times 100% plus modifiers. I don't know if I might have messed up that formula. That's kind of confusing, but basically, don't worry about it. Basically, it just means that you have the total trade value times how much you have out of it times 100% of this, basically, plus modifiers. So basically what that means is we have 45%, we get 45% of this plus the modifiers. And what the modifiers are is the trade efficiency. Trade efficiency increases how much money you actually get. It basically just, it doesn't increase the total value of the node or anything like that. So it just affects your nation, but it means you get more money for every ducat you pull from a node. Excuse me. So the things that increase these are, you can kind of see a little overview there. Things that increase this are, I don't think there's anything here for traditions, but there's ideas, like here's one for here. In trade ideas, I believe there's one. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure there is, though. Yep, trade efficiency. There's other ways to get it, too, but trade efficiency is a really good way for just increasing your flat income from money. There's also a couple policies. If you don't know what those are, it's when you get 2 or more idea groups. You can kind of group them together, make policies. Those will also increase your income. And the last thing is to make the East Indian Trade Company, which I have never done before, and I couldn't tell you about, but I know that does increase it as well. So just to end this video, we're going to do some overall tips. So I'm just going to kind of state a couple things. So first off, with merchants, remember you don't normally want to collect in your capital, because not only do you automatically collect in your capital, which I should have said earlier, but also you don't want to collect anywhere else really as well. It's very situational though. You might want to occasionally, but normally, as a rule of thumb for beginners in trade, don't collect in anywhere, especially not your capital. Use your merchants to transfer trade downstream towards your home node where you have the node where you have the most power. Second, move towards desirable nodes. In other words, Venice, Genoa, English Channel. If you can't do that, move towards Alexandria, Constantinople, Lubeck. Sevilla is pretty good, but move towards desirable nodes and try to take land in those, because that's how you really increase power, including the centers of trade and estuaries and stuff like that. And last, I will say, protect trade. Oh, I already said this actually. I kind of repeated myself. Yeah, protect trade and collect in the node you have the highest control over. So with that, I'm going to say, the last thing I'm going to say is a couple nations if you want to have a good trade game. If you want to like start out, I would recommend some of the following. So, of course, there's Venice, which I'm playing as for the purposes of this video. There's Genoa, another really good trade nation. That's what I'm thinking of, or republic. Then up here in kind of near Denmark, northern Germany, there's the Hansa. The Hansa is very, very good for trade because they have a whole bunch of, they're a merchant republic, and they kind of control a lot of the Lubeck node, which is probably like the next best node that's not an end node, in my opinion at least. It's a very, very rich node. It just gets a lot of this German trade and a lot of this Baltic trade and Russian trade and whatnot. And I would also say that the Netherlands are a very, very good nation to form as. The Netherlands actually don't exist at the beginning of the game, but if you're able to create the Netherlands playing as Friesland, Gelre, Utrecht, or Holland or something, or Brabant maybe, or even Flanders I think can. If you're able to form the Netherlands with one of those, it's very, very good, because I'll show you real quick. They start off in this region with already like 2 centers of trade and estuary, and it's pretty good. It's a pretty good region, especially Holland is very, very good province. So that's a very good nation to play as. It's a little hard to form though, and I've actually been considering doing a guide for that. So if you'd like to see that, tell me. Some non-traditional nations you could play as include like England, because they already start in one of the best nodes. And I mean, they kind of are traditional, but they're not really a trade republic. They're more like naval, military, and colonialism based. But you can play them very hard on trade too. Aragon, because they control so much of the Genoa node already, they're very fun to play. You can kind of just try to expand along the coast and control more land. France is pretty good because they have options to go towards Genoa or to the English Channel or even to Venice. And then Oman, which I don't think I can even see, but Oman is right over here on the Arabian Peninsula because they are able to control lots of the trade coming from India and the Silk Road. So with that, I'm gonna wish you guys luck in your trade capitalistic ventures, whatever you want to call them in EU4. Hopefully you have fun with some of those nations or find your own nations that work even better. And hopefully this guide helps. If it does, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe for more. I love doing these EU4 guides. I'll definitely be doing more in the future. If you have suggestions for stuff that you would like to see guides of, I do plenty of research, so I try to keep it very informative and detailed and correct and accurate. So go ahead and tell me if you would like to see anything else. And with that, I'm going to go. So until next time, goodbye.